It is July 1st, 1962, and you are in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. The Belgian flag is being lowered for the last time, and the new flag of independent Rwanda rises in its place. The air thrums with excitement, possibility, hope. But if you look closely at the crowd, you might notice something odd. While most celebrate, some faces remain carefully neutral. Others are notably absent. And in the back, a group of Belgian administrators are watching with expressions that can only be described as people who've broken something expensive and are trying to leave before anyone notices. Standing on the podium, Gregoire Kayibanda, that former seminary teacher we met in our last episode, is about to become Rwanda's first president. In his inauguration speech, he promises a new Rwanda, free from colonial oppression. The irony? He's delivering the speech in French, using a political system designed by Belgians through a bureaucracy built by colonizers. This is part 3 of our series on Rwanda, Independent in Name. You know how they say you can't understand someone until you walk a mile in their shoes? Well, I'd argue you can't understand a nation until you've walked through its history. Not just the highlight reel or the sanitized version you find in textbooks. I mean really getting into its DNA. Those defining moments that shaped everything that came after. Those moments where paths were chosen, where decisions were made in palaces and backrooms and city streets that changed the course of millions of lives. I'm your host, Paul, and this is Double Helix, Blueprint of Nations, where we unravel the genetic code of countries through their most transformative moments. Think of it like ancestry testing, but for entire nations. We dig deep into the historical DNA, finding those crucial moments that made countries who they are today. The story of Rwanda's independence is not just about the transfer of power, it's about the persistence of systems. In those first crucial months, the new government found itself inheriting more than just buildings and paperwork. They inherited an entire machinery of control, one that would prove dangerously effective in new hands. Let me take you to a moment that captures this perfectly. It is August 1962. Barely a month after independence. We're in a government office in Gitarama, where a newly appointed Hutu administrator is processing citizenship papers. He reaches for a stamp and freezes. It's the same stamp used by the Belgians to mark racial categories. After a moment's hesitation, he brings it down on the paper with a decisive thunk. Some habits, it seems, are harder to break than others. This continuity of colonial systems wasn't accidental. It was fundamental to how independent Rwanda would function. Parme Hutu, Kayibanda's party, quickly discovered that Belgian administrative structures could be remarkably effective when repurposed. The same identity cards that once privileged Tutsis could now be used to exclude them. The same population registers that tracked colonial subjects could now monitor citizens. Thomas Musigege, a Tutsi businessman in Butare, witnessed this transformation firsthand. The only thing that changed, he observed, was which names went in which boxes. His business license, issued under Belgian rule, was now invalid under regulations that mirror colonial restrictions, just with targets reversed. The true test of these inherited systems came in December 1963, when a desperate group of Tutsi refugees attempted an incursion from Burundi. The response revealed how efficiently colonial administrative structures could be turned to new purposes. Between December 1963 and January 1964, systematic violence claimed more than 10,000 and 14,000 Tutsi lives. Marie-Claire Mukamana, hiding in a church during this period, witnessed the methodical nature of the violence. They had lists, she recalled. The same kind of list the Belgians used to have. But now, these papers weren't for tracking cattle or taxes. They were for hunting people. By 1964, Rwanda's transformation was complete. The government implemented strict quotas in education and employment, limiting Tutsi participation to no more than 9%. In schools, workplaces, and government offices, colonial-era classification systems determined access to opportunities and resources. But beneath this administrative continuity, new tensions were emerging. Rwanda's economy, heavily dependent on coffee exports, struggled with plummeting global prices. Regional disparities grew more pronounced, particularly between Kayibanda's southern power base and the northern sections. In the north, particularly around Ruhengeri and Gisenyi, a quiet opposition was forming. Major Juvenal Habyarimana, a military officer from the north, watched as civil service appointments and development projects consistently favored the South. The same detailed administrative records that tracked ethnic categories now revealed patterns of regional discrimination. By 1970, these overlapping tensions, ethnic, regional, economic, had created an increasingly unstable situation. The economy continued to decline, while Tutsi refugees in neighboring countries began organizing. The government's response was to heighten ethnic rhetoric, blaming the Tutsi minority for every national challenge. The culmination came on July 5, 1973. Habyarimana's coup was remarkable not for its violence, but for its administrative precision. Using the same bureaucratic structures that had served both the Belgians and Kayibanda, he established what he called the Second Republic. The Habyarimana years brought what historians would later call developmental dictatorship, a period when Rwanda's international reputation for efficiency masked deepening internal fractures. Let me take you to a scene that captures this contradiction perfectly. It's 1976, and a World Bank delegation is touring a model village in Gisenyi Prefecture. They're impressed by the orderly rows of houses, the carefully maintained coffee plantations, the precise administrative records. What they don't see, what they can't see, is what happened to make this model village possible. In a small house on the outskirts, Innocent Ndiayambe, a former resident, watches the delegation pass. Before this was a model village, he later testified, it was just our village. Then they came with their plans, their quotas, their forms. Some of us were moved to make room for people from the president's region. They called it development. We called it displacement. This was Habyarimana's Rwanda, a country where development projects often served as covers for deeper political agendas. The same administrative machinery that had served the Belgians, then Kayibanda, now helped redistribute population and resources according to new priorities. By 1978, this system had achieved a kind of terrible efficiency. Let me take you to a prefecture office in Ruhengeri, where local administrator Jean-Baptiste Hakizimana is reviewing quarterly reports. Every aspect of life is documented, from coffee production quotas to political meeting attendance. We know everything about everyone, he boasted to a visiting French official. It makes governance so much simpler. But this efficiency came at a cost. In the refugee camps of Uganda, a generation was coming of age with no memory of Rwanda except their parents' stories. Paul Kagame, then a young refugee, later describes these years. We grew up studying maps of a country we couldn't enter, memorizing the names of hills we couldn't climb. Our parents marked every Christmas day by saying, "Next year in Rwanda." After a while, we stopped believing in them. The 1980s brought new pressures. Structural adjustment programs demanded by international lenders began dismantling the state-controlled economy that had helped maintain Habyarimana's power. Once again, coffee prices plummeted. The Akasu, the inner circle around the president, tightened their grip on diminishing resources. Let me show you how this played out at the local level. It's 1985, and we're in a small coffee cooperative near Gitarama. The manager, Emmanuel Bizimana, is explaining new quotas to angry farmers. The global coffee price has dropped by 50%, but the government-mandated production targets have increased. Even the Belgians weren't this demanding, one farmer mutters. Bizimana pretends not to hear. In Habyarimana's Rwanda, even coffee production is political. By 1987, the contradictions were becoming impossible to ignore. At the National University in Butare, a group of students conducted a remarkable study. Using government records, those same meticulous administrative files we've been talking about, they demonstrated how power and resources had been systematically concentrated in the hands of a northern elite. Let me take you to the moment when this report reached Habyarimana's desk. It's a warm afternoon in Kigali, and the president is meeting with his advisors. The study's findings are clear. 80% of civil service positions are held by northerners, who represent only 25% of the population. The army command is almost entirely from Gisenyi and Ruhengeri, northern provinces. Development projects consistently favor the north. One advisor suggests suppressing the report. Another recommends arresting the students. But a third option emerges. Use the very administrative system that they've criticized to slowly squeeze them out. We don't need violence, one minister argues. We have bureaucracy. This was how power worked in Habyarimana's Rwanda. Not through obvious repression, but through the quiet manipulation of administrative systems. Want to remove troublesome students? Adjust the university quota system. Need to silence critics? Revoke their travel permits. Want to maintain regional dominance? Control civil service appointments. But while this system appears stable from inside Rwanda, pressure was building from without. The gap between Rwanda's international reputation and its internal reality was perhaps best captured in a single week in 1988. Let me take you there. Monday morning, April 18th, 1988. A World Bank delegation arrives in Kigali to review what they're already calling the Rwanda miracle. They're escorted to carefully select development projects, shown immaculately kept records, presented with statistics suggesting remarkable progress. Rwanda has become the darling of international donors, a stable, efficient nation in a turbulent region. But let's step away from the official tour. In a small village just 20 kilometers from one of these model projects, Emmanuel Nkundabizengi is explaining to his children why they have to leave school. The new development plan has redirected water resources to a state-owned coffee plantation. His family's small farm, which once grew food crops, is withering. The government tells us to grow coffee, he later recalled, but you cannot eat coffee beans. This was the darker side of Habyarimana's development, a system that privileged cash crops over food security, centralized control over local needs. The same administrative efficiency that impressed foreign donors was being used to reshape rural life, often with devastating consequences. Now let's move to Wednesday of that same week. In Kigali's central market, John Mukamwenzi, a small trader, is being informed that her permit won't be renewed. The market is being modernized, another development project funded by enthusiastic donors. What the donors don't see is how these permits are redistributed. John, from the south, will lose her spot to someone from the president's northern region. It's always like this now, she explains. Everything's good, and it always flows north, like water downhill. The northern dominance went far beyond civil service appointments. Let me take you to a military training camp outside Ruhengeri. It's now Friday morning, and new recruits are arriving. Look at their identification cards. Almost all of them are from Gisenyi and Ruhengeri prefectures. This wasn't coincidence. The army, like every other state institution, has become a northern stronghold. But perhaps the most telling scene from this week takes place at the prefecture office in Butare. A local administrator there is reviewing applications for university scholarships. The official quota system allows for balanced regional representation, but there is another document on his desk. Unofficial guidelines that ensure northern applicants receive preferential treatment. We maintain 2 sets of books, he later admitted. One for international observers and one for reality. This system of parallel truths extended throughout Rwandan society. Take the Umuganda mandatory community labor that was a cornerstone of Habyarimana's development policy. Foreign observers praised it as an example of African socialism and community solidarity. But let's visit an Umuganda session in Gitarama Prefecture. It's now Saturday morning, and citizens are being mobilized to build a new road. The project coordinator, a northerner recently appointed to the region, consults his list. Who gets assigned the heaviest labor? Who gets cited for insufficient participation? Who faces fines? The patterns are clear. The same administrative machinery that impressed donors with efficiency was being used as a tool for regional and ethnic control. This was Habyarimana's Rwanda, a nation of parallel realities. In one reality, presented to the world, it was a model of development, stability, and efficient administration. In another, experienced by its citizens, it was a pressure cooker of regional favoritism, ethnic tension, and economic disparity. Let me show you how these realities intersected. We reached the end of the week. It is now Sunday evening. At the Hotel de Mille Collines, the World Bank delegation is having a farewell dinner, celebrating Rwanda's progress. Just outside, a group of northern businessmen are finalizing deals for a new development project. And in the kitchen, southern workers whisper about relatives who fled to Uganda, about disappearances, about the growing sense that something has to break. One of the kitchen workers, let's call him Claude, would later testify about that evening. We could hear them in the restaurant, praising Rwanda's stability. We wanted to tell them, this stability is built on sand. Come to our homes, see how we live, see how the system really works. Who would listen to a kitchen worker over a government minister? The international community misread Rwanda, and it wasn't just about missing warning signs. It was about mistaking systems of control for systems of progress. The very efficiency they praised was what made Rwanda so dangerous. Every list, every permit, every identity card was part of an administrative machinery that could be turned from development to destruction with terrifying ease. This machinery was about to face its greatest test, the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, watching from Uganda. They saw the international praise, the statistical progress, the apparent stability, but they also saw what lay underneath, the regional favoritism, the ethnic discrimination, and the systematic exclusion of refugees from any possibility of return. The machinery of genocide is not yet in motion, but its blueprints are there, hidden in plain sight in the filing cabinets and record books of a seemingly efficient state. As the 1990s approached, Rwanda's carefully maintained facade began to crack. Economic challenges, intensified by structural adjustment programs, created widespread hardship. Coffee prices collapsed. International pressure for democratization mounted, and in the refugee camps, a generation raised on stories of return was preparing to force the issue. Machinery of the state, those administrative structures inherited from colonialism and maintained through 2 republics, would soon be turned to even darker purposes. Let me leave you with one final scene. It's 1989, in a small village near the Ugandan border. An elderly woman stands on her field, looking north. She remembers Independence Day in 1962, remembers the hope of that moment. We thought we were free, she tells her grandchildren. We just changed masters. The real revolution, it is still to come. She didn't know it then, but that revolution was already taking shape across the border, and when it came, it would test whether Rwanda's colonial inheritance, its administrative machinery, its ethnic categories, its centralized control, would be its salvation or its undoing. Next time, on Double Helix, we'll explore how the RPF invasion of 1990 became the catalyst of Rwanda's final tragedy. We'll witness how the machinery of administration became the machinery of genocide, and how the world's failure to understand Rwanda's past left it blind to the horrors of its present. Until then, thank you for listening. We will see you soon.